Are you aware of the hidden crisis crippling Russia's economy? It's not a new political scandal or cyber attack. It's the reliance on a single resource, oil. Hello guys, and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we'll explore how Russia's energy crisis is driving the country into an economic downturn and what the future may hold. Get ready to uncover the shocking truth about the role of oil in Russia's economic struggles. You won't want to miss it. The Russian economy is performing better than projected 9 months after Russia invaded Ukraine. This was not something that was anticipated. The feared collapse has not occurred, and the loss in GDP for the year that was projected to be between 8 and 10% has been cut to a drop of between 3 and 4%. Nevertheless, before the conflict, projections were for an increase of 3%. At most, the beginning of the recovery is not anticipated until 2024. And even then, only in the very unusual scenario that external variables do not dramatically deteriorate. It seems like Russia is about to experience yet another lost decade, with 1 decade of complacency being followed by 1 decade of decline. The Russian government and the central bank have cushioned the economic blow from the war against Ukraine and the sanctions that followed it. This has been made possible, in no small part, by the conservative fiscal policies of recent years. These policies have included things like constantly balancing the budget with an oil price of $45 per barrel and keeping expenditures on a tight leash, even at the cost of economic growth. In addition to that, the implementation of penalties had already begun to be planned. Companies owned by the state and major banks had conducted stress tests, which included hypothetical situations in which Russia was cut off from SWIFT. The West stopped supplying certain technologies and correspondent accounts were blocked. However, other measures, such as the freezing of gold and currency reserves, were not modeled in the tests. The reports that were handed in to the Russian authorities were all very upbeat and positive since, historically speaking, people are reluctant to disclose issues. An embargo on information technology and microchips was anticipated to be the most severe restriction. Nevertheless, this measure would not have an immediate impact on the majority of industries. Because of these preparations, the short-term impact of the penalties has been shown to be less severe than anticipated. But it has also been shown to last for a longer period of time. The budget, which was boosted in the first few months by earnings from oil and gas, has started to grow smaller. In October, income from sources other than oil and gas saw a decline of 20% on a yearly basis, and practically all of the gain in oil and gas revenues was attributable to an increase in the mineral extraction tax levied on Gazprom. The decline in industrial output that occurred in the first 10 months of this year was found to be just 0.1%, making it a very insignificant event. However, this is largely attributable to an increase in military spending, which led to expansion in industries such as clothing and metal goods, including tanks and missiles. This growth in civilian industries, such as automobile production, which almost halved, timber processing, and machine building, was obscured by the growth in military spending. Because Russian industry, including the military sector, is so strongly reliant on the import of high-tech items, most of which come from the West, the current economic downturn is certain to persist. The only country whose technology imports have increased is Turkey. The rest of the world has seen a decline. The collapse of those imports will result in a reduction in output, which will in turn make it more primitive. This transformation is already under progress. As a consequence of the sanctions, import substitution is now necessary in practically every industry, but it has a retrograde effect since worn-out components are being replaced with choices that are technologically less sophisticated. Along with the lack of equal alternative options, the departure of numerous Western enterprises on their own will, and the complete cessation of commerce with Europe in regards to energy commodities will continue to be detrimental to the Russian economy. Additionally, it cannot depend on much in the way of assistance from inside its own ranks. The climate of uncertainty poses a threat to investments, which run the danger of being reduced. Due to the adverse environment for business, private companies were already cutting down on their investments. Now, because of the conflict and the sanctions, it has been entirely eradicated. Even the most pro-state companies will not invest in a nation that is currently engaged in a conflict, because it poses too great of a risk for them to be required to make contributions to the military in the form of additional taxes or even directly. It is also challenging for the state to make significant investments on a broad basis. According to the recently approved budget for the next 3 years, the top priority of the government is unquestionably the funding of the war. The defense and law enforcement sectors will account for roughly a third of the total expenditures, 9.3 trillion rubles in the budget in 2023. These sectors will be the primary sources of spending for the budget. On the other hand, spending on the economy will decrease from 4.5 trillion rubles in 2022 to 3.5 trillion rubles in 2023. This change will take place during the next 2 years. A historical high percentage of the total spending is categorized. The overall number of expenditures is expected to practically stay steady at 29 trillion rubles. But this will translate to a considerable drop in real terms due to inflation. The expenditure on the requirements of the military, on the other hand, is shielded from any decline in revenue. Thus, if reductions in spending are required, they will be made to the expenditures on the growth of the economy and the extension of social programs. Because of the emphasis that is being placed on meeting the requirements of the military, the government is in no position to make improving the investment climate one of its top priorities. There have already been 300,000 persons between the ages of 22 and 50 who have been mobilized, which has resulted in a decrease of 0.5% of GDP, and there may be additional waves of mobilization ahead. It is more difficult to determine the long-term losses that have occurred as a result of the large number of individuals who have left Russia since the beginning of the conflict. The number of persons who have left Russia is believed to be between 500,000 and 1 million. The brain drain will put pressure on the labor market, pushing up salaries faster than productivity and contributing to inflationary threats. This will occur because there will be a lack of competent employees as a consequence of the brain drain. There will be significant challenges to overcome as a result of the realignment of Russian manufacturing toward new markets. The port, rail, and pipeline capabilities are already at capacity, and the building of additional capacity needs resources and technology. The throughput capability of the infrastructure connecting Russia with the East is restricted. As a consequence of the sanctions, the infrastructure that was previously used to serve commerce with Europe is now not in use. The unwillingness of foreign container transport firms to collaborate with Russia is creating roadblocks for the delivery of non-sanctioned commodities, even to countries with whom Russia has positive relations. Not only is there a problem with actually delivering the items, but there is also a problem with either paying for them or getting money for them. There is a possibility that transactions in euros and dollars may be delayed or perhaps stopped. Even in so-called friendly nations, banks will not create accounts for Russian enterprises and will not set up correspondent accounts for Russian financial institutions. As a result, Russia is under more pressure to make concessions and provide price reductions to those markets that are still willing to purchase its wares. At the moment, Russia is in greater need of those markets than those markets are in need of Russia. Because of its limited size, a U-turn toward the domestic market can only give a limited amount of assistance for the manufacturing industry. The state has only been able to assist businesses with specific measures, such as permitting payments to be made in cash for international trade activities in order to minimize the usage of dollars and euros. The state has not been able to assist businesses with systemic solutions. The majority of Russian companies are devising their own strategies for adjusting to the new environment. If the government continues to avoid the temptation of sinking to a state plan with rigorous controls on who provides what to whom, the Russian economy will probably survive and the adaptation phase will conclude around 9 years from now in September of 2023. The pre-war potential of the Russian economy was not very enormous, with growth averaging between 2 and 3% each year. The conflict in Ukraine and the imposition of foreign restrictions have brought it down to around 1%. For the time being, forward progress in the economy will be halted, and it will take between 3 and 5 years until this downward trend is brought to an end. It is a common refrain from both the administration and President Vladimir Putin that Russia already has everything necessary for further growth. However, in order to make the transition to development based on the country's own resources, The conflict in Ukraine would first need to be resolved. In addition to this, there would need to be a general reduction in the amount of unpredictability, as well as an increase in competitiveness, the legalization of economic infractions, and efficient protections for property rights. These prerequisites have not been met on a continuous basis by the authorities in Russia or by the president of that country. As we've seen, Russia's reliance on oil exports has contributed to its current economic struggles. The country's energy crisis highlights the importance of diversifying a nation's economy and not becoming too reliant on a single industry. Thank you for watching our video on Russia's energy crisis. If you found this information interesting, please consider subscribing to our channel for more in-depth analysis of current events. Thank you for your support.